Beautiful. How we doing, everyone? Some video. I love talking about relationships, and relationships are huge. All types of relationships, romantic relationships, friendships. Relationships make up our world. So in this video, we're going to go into the six types of relationships. We're going to go into all the different types of relationships, the qualities that embody that relationship, how that relationship functions in our life, what it's actually doing to us. Relationships, guys, are really important for us to know about, like on every level. We should know what's going on in our relationship emotionally, what's going on physically, what's going on mentally, what's going on spiritually. We should know all these components because relationships determine so much of who we are. Relationships determine so much of how we choose to show up in the world and how we act. So this video is going to go deeply into the 6 different types of relationships and all the qualities that each relationship type carries, how it affects you, how it forms your relationship, so you can better understand your own relationships in your own life and where you need to work on them, or where survival. I don't think I'm spelling that right. There we go. There's no I. Survival relationship. So the survival relationship, this is a really common relationship that we see in the world today, because a lot of people are in survivor mode. They're in fight or flight mode. They're just trying to pay the bills. They're just trying to survive in life. And these relationships are kind of marked with hostility. So hostility, codependence, these types of relationships are more low level, and they're low level because each person is depending upon the other person for something. So I'll give you a good example of this. Let's say there's a man who's working on Wall Street. He makes a lot of money, but he doesn't have a real emotional core. And this is just a typical example. There's a lot of people who work on Wall Street who I'm sure are amazing and full of emotion, but let's just say there's a man who works on Wall Street and he has an incredible amount of money, but he's not really connected to himself emotionally at all. So he has no emotional support system. Emotionally, he's really, really dead. And then let's say that there's a woman who can't take care of herself financially. However, she has such a big heart. She has a really, really big heart. She has so much to give to the world. She lives in her heart center. She's very, very emotional. So they would come together, and that would be a really, really good match for them because they're both based on similar needs. So where the guy working on Wall Street, he has this need for an emotional connection and to feel that love. Well, the girl, she has this need for money and to be taken care of. So they link up and they connect together. And so that's what the survival relationship really comes down to. It's what needs do we need? What core needs? We all need the need to feel loved. We all need money to survive and to pay for rent and to get food. So that's another important part. So in this type of relationship, you can see both people are actually connected with one another. So, and guys, if I'm not saying hello throughout the video, I'm seeing you. It's just that I'm in the middle of the lecture, so I don't want to disrupt that. So the survival type of relationship is a lot of times based on hostility and codependence, but it doesn't always start like that. Have you guys ever had the experience where a relationship started off really, really good and then it went south? And one of the reasons why a survival relationship eventually goes south is because the other person can't give the other person those needs. So for instance, let's say one person has all the money and the other person has all the love, and the one person, and they're getting those things from each other. So let's say the financial guy, let's say he starts losing money and realizes that he can't support this woman. Well, then the woman will naturally want to leave him because she can't have her needs met. Or vice versa. Let's say the woman is full of love and she's giving that love and affection to that guy, but then she starts giving love and affection to other men, and the financial guy gets upset, and this really, really hurts him. And if that's the case, then what's going to happen is the relationship will start to fall apart. People will start to get hostile. they'll start to get upset because the other person isn't providing that need that they really wanted to from the beginning. So this is what characterizes the survival relationship. It's all about survival. It's about those primitive core needs. What do you need? What do I need? And it's really basic. And then when those needs aren't met by the other person, it causes confrontation and things can get real ugly real quick. So the survival relationship, it's a lower level energy relationship. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just the nature of where people are in their life. So that's the first relationship, and this is really common in a lot of poor areas where there's low income. Just because it's a survival relationship. People come together, they form symbiotic relationships based off of needs. Hey, I can provide this for you, you can provide this for me. It's that simple. So the next type of relationship is the validation relationship. Okay, so validation, this marker is killing me. Number 2, so validation. And the validation relationship. And the validation relationship is the type of relationship where people just want to be validated by social groups. And this is really common. You see this an incredible amount in young people, right? In high school or in college. A validation relationship is based off of a perception. So for instance, let's say, a lot of people who are in high school or in college, they think of that perfect relationship, sitting on the Ford pickup truck together on the hood at an elevated place, and they're both in love and they're young. It's like this ideal image, right? It's the romanticized version of what a relationship is. This is the validation relationship. Another good classic example is of a jock, like a sports guy who's dating the cheerleader, right? That's a validation form of relationship. It's role based. So it's based in social roles. So there's the really pretty cheerleader, and then there's like the really good looking quarterback who's good at everything. And they get together because it's what society expects. It's like, oh yeah, the good looking pretty cheerleader goes with the good looking varsity quarterback. And so that's the validation relationship. The relationship isn't actually intimate. There's not too much intimacy. It's really based off of the validation of everyone else. So a validation relationship is where we get in relationship with a person so we can be accepted by other social groups or we can be looked up to. So in these types of relationships, there's not actually too much real intimacy. The intimacy goes as deep as the social roles allow them to. So for instance, let's say the quarterback gets with the head cheerleader, right? The real classic example. And everyone in the school is like, oh, I want to be that couple. I want to be like them. That's the validation. So they are both getting validated. Like they're in these social roles, they're looked up to, and that feels good. In these types of relationships, it's actually not about the relationship itself. It's about the relationship to the community or the social group that you want recognition of or that you want to be recognized by. So that classic example of the quarterback and the cheerleader, it's not about the quarterback and the cheerleader, about their lives. It's actually about their community and the social roles that they're playing and winning that love and that approval by the social group. So the validation relationships are very top surface. They're not deep. They're very, what's the word? Not facadal, but they're not deep. So I'm just going to put not deep for right now. I can't think of another word, but they're just not deep. They don't go deep. They're not emotionally satisfying in and of themselves. They're only emotionally satisfying when the culture or the other social groups recognizes them as an authority. So like everyone wants to be the perfect varsity quarterback or the really good looking cheerleader. Everyone wants to be that person, right? Or so those people think. So it's really social. Validation relationships are not deep. It's just about social roles, like social approval. So social approval. Awesome. So that's number 2. All right, number 3. Number three is individual assertion relationships. And these are great relationships to be in, guys. Individual assertion. So individual assertion relationships, these types of relationships are really, really healthy. And they're healthy because it's actually about allowing the other person to grow in a way that you couldn't feel, that you couldn't get before. So they feel very, they're characterized by a feeling of spaciousness. So spacious. They're very open. There's not too much dependence. They're very independent. That's a good way to put it. Independent. So a lot of us, when we're younger, we don't always, based off the family that we grow up in, we're not always given recognition or approval to be or live a certain way. We have to hide parts of our inner child based off of our environment when we're growing up. So a lot of people who are getting in these individual assertion relationships, what's actually going on in their life is they're coming to a point where a deeper part of them is ready to come forward. Like a deeper part of them wants to express itself. However, they may not feel comfortable unless they're with another person who's already in that energy. You know, part of my last relationship was like this. I was with a girl who just kind of was always allowed to express herself and be the way that she wanted to be. And I never felt like I really had that too much. And so she ignited in me a whole new level of creativity and openness and provided a space for me and an energy for me where I could feel safe to express parts of me that I had never expressed before. So that relationship was really, really key in my development in terms of me figuring out what it is that I wanted, how do I want it to become, how I wanted to be in the world. So the individual assertion relationship feels very spacious, it feels open, it feels independent. There's not too much codependency there. The individual assertion relationship is about people coming together and those people seeing other facets in that other person that they want. So let's say you have, I'll give you a good example. Let's say you have a guy who's really, really intellectual. He's really smart. He doesn't have too much of an emotional center, but he's really, really smart. He's good at math. I'm just really using a very general example here to make it easy, but so he's a smart guy, he's into math, and he doesn't really have a creative side yet. So he's just really focused, more logical, more linear. Well, then let's say he dates a girl who's into the arts. She likes acting, she likes singing, music. She's she goes this way, she goes that way. So he meets with her and they get together and he experiences and sees the level of creativity and openness and artistry that this woman embodies, and he wants to embody that more. So what happens is he gets in a relationship with her and starts to embody that energy, and they hold space for one another. And let's say the girl, who's really an artist type, actually wants to learn more about the logical side of things, more math oriented. And so they come together and form that basis with each other. That's the individual assertion relationship. Each person comes to the relationship wanting something from the other person that they don't have. And it's not something that the other person provides for them, like in the sense of like the survival relationship, like, oh, I'm going to get money from this person's going to give me emotional love. No, it's qualities of life, qualities of experience, ways of being. So in the individual assertion relationship, you have people who come together and say, I want to develop that quality that other person has. So I'm going to be in a relationship with them, and hopefully I will develop more of that quality. I hope that makes sense, guys. These are really healthy relationships. Both people come at it and they allow the other person to grow. There's not too much codependency. There's not too much of holding this and that over the other person. It's just, hey, I want to grow this way and you want to grow that way. So let's get together and see what we can create. Awesome. All right, this is a really important relationship, and this has been one that is big in my own life. It's called the healing relationship, right? So the healing relationship is another one that's incredibly prevalent and shows up in our life a lot of the times. The healing relationship is based off of both people are going through a really, really hard time, or they're healing from a past experience. So they get together, right? They get together and they find union, and they find understanding and compassion and love in their own wounding. And that's what characterizes this relationship is past woundings. So past woundings. Beautiful. Past woundings. So in this relationship, I'll give you an example. Let's say a guy's wife dies, and she dies of cancer. And so he's been living for the last 2 years, and he really misses his wife, and he hurts. He feels hurt. His heart misses his wife, and he's starting to feel lonely because his wife died. So 2 years has gone by. His heart hurts, but he feels like he wants another connection again with someone. And so he meets another girl at, just some place, and she just went through a rough divorce, or maybe she just lost a husband from cancer or something else. And so they both share their own wounds, and those wounds join them together. They feel close, they feel connected, because that relationship is based off of a similar wounding. And so that's the healing relationship. And in that space, there can be healing in and of itself. Healing comes from sharing, when we share and when we come together. So in the healing relationship, when you have people who have both been through certain similar traumas, or who are feeling internally the same way, maybe they don't feel understood by the world, but they're both feeling the same way, and then they share their internal worlds and their internal hurts and their internal wounds with one another. Well, this is the healing relationship. So they come together based off of that same hurt or that same wound. So the healing relationship is great in one sense, because we can really heal, we can connect with another human being, and we can learn to move on with our life. So we connect over those past woundings. However, at the same time, it can get a little deadly, and it can possibly be codependent, because one person might heal faster than the other. And so if one person starts to heal faster than the other, then the other person might feel like they're going to lose that partner, and they might try to pull them back in and try to be like, oh, let's feel sorrow together, let's grieve together. But that might not be what the other partner wants to do anymore. They're ready to move on with their life, and they've healed. But the healing relationship can be very, very satisfying. I had that somewhat in my last relationship. I was with a girl, and she was healing her own problems with her father. I was healing my own issues with my mom. And that was really what brought a lot of us together. She was working on a relationship and repairing the relationship with her father, and I was working and repairing on the relationship with my mother. And that's what really kept us close together. But then once we both worked through those issues, we didn't really have that problem anymore, and we really didn't need to be together anymore, as much as I loved her. But that was the end of that relationship, because we had both done the healing that we needed to do, the healing work that we needed. Awesome. So what's number 5? Number 5 is experimental. 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 So these are the types of relationships that you see in college a lot. Not just in college, but sometimes even before college, in high school or even middle school. These types of relationships are open-ended. That's really the big key here. They're open-ended. They're playful. They're not too serious, right? So in these types of relationships, people just go about doing whatever it is that they want to do. Let's say that they're having trouble, or they're exploring their sexual identity, and so they come together and they say, well, I've always, maybe you're a guy and you say, well, I've always liked a girl, but I kind of like feel this emotional intimacy with this guy, and I don't know what this is about, and do I really want to express this? So then they experiment sexually with that other guy. That's an experimental relationship. It's just completely open-ended. It's fun, it's playful. You're just trying to maybe figure out a deeper new part of yourself. So you're going to get in relationship with this person to figure something else out deeper. Some people, I never really experimented with this, but some people, they do feel like they need to have relationships with the same sex And then they find out, okay, that's not something that I want. You know, they might have a relationship with another man, or they might be a girl and have a relationship with another girl, but it's not something that they actually desire. And so then they move on from it, and there's no hurt feelings. So experimental relationships, there's nothing wrong with them. They're just open-ended, they're playful. They're probably not going to go anywhere. They don't have any longevity. It's really about self-exploration. That's the key. That's the key term here. Self-exploration. Awesome. Great. Awesome. So guys, now we've talked about the 6 types. 1, 2, 3. I feel like I'm missing one. Okay, let me revert this. I'm going to put 5. I don't know why I wrote 6. So we're going to put 5. Now, guys, I want to get into some of the variables that we talk about when it comes to these relationships, because each relationship has different variables to them, and we need to understand which type of relationship we're in. And I want you to understand that these different types of relationships, you can have elements of both. You know, you can be in a survival relationship that also has elements of, you know, healing. That was my last relationship I was in. My last relationship, I was very much in a survival mode still from my war traumas, but a lot of that was also healing for me as well, and it was healing for her as well. So you can combine some of these elements. It's not just one specifically. All these elements will show up in some relationships. Beautiful. So now I want to get into some of the variables. So I hope I'm gonna take this off the board, guys. I hope you understand this. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them up there. But these are the 5 different types: survival, validation, individual assertion, healing, and experiential. Beautiful. Now I want to get into the different types of intimacy. And intimacy is a really interesting word, because a lot of times when we think of intimacy, we think of like physical intimacy, where we're really, really close with another person or another individual. And that's not necessarily true. That's not how it works. There's all different types of intimacy. It's not just physical. But I'm going to go into the different types of intimacies, because intimacy is really, really important when it comes to understanding relationships. Without intimacy, the relationship will fall apart. So I'm going to get into the different types of intimacies here. So number 1 is physical. Physical intimacy. And understanding intimacy is really critical, key, and important if we want to understand what's coming in and how we're feeling about a relationship. So typically when we think of physical intimacy, we think of sex. Like, that's just kind of what first comes to mind for a lot of people. But it's way deeper than that. Physical intimacy is how you touch another person. And how you touch another people is a communication. That's actual. So yes, we communicate verbally, guys. We say, oh, I love you, I care for you, but we also communicate tactily. We communicate with our bodies, right? So for instance, when I hug a person, that's a form of communication. You're opening, you're embracing them, and you're giving them a hug. You know, you're not saying you love them, but you're doing it with your body. So I want to look at, we need to look at communication as more than just speaking. It's how we actually physically be and act in the world, how we actually use our bodies. So for physical intimacy, it's not just having sex. That's like the greatest form of showing you care or have affection for another person. But it's also what you do with your body, how you give hugs. You know, maybe you give a person a back rub, or, you know, your partner a back rub because you care for them and you see that they're stressed out and you want them to feel better. That's one way to show physical intimacy. Now, we want to become really, really aware of how we show physical intimacy, but we also want to be aware of how we receive physical intimacy, because it says something about us. Not all of us know how to receive physical intimacy. So let's say that your partner comes up behind you and gives you a back rub and you shy away from it. Why do you do that? Are that person wants to show you physical intimacy, they care about you. Why are you shying away from them? If you're doing that and they say, hey, why did you do that? And you say, I don't know. Well, there might be something that you're upset about them for. So understanding all the signs that go into physical intimacy and the ways that we communicate physically is really important to understand what's going on within us. So let's say, for example, you're with another person and you have some emotional connection with them. It's your partner. You really deeply love them. Let's say they do something that upsets you, but you don't know that you're upset at them yet. You just feel upset at them, but you're really not sure why. And so they come over and they try to rub your back and you pull and shy away. And then they say, hey, what's the matter? Like, why did you do that? And you say, I don't know. Well, that's a sign. If you're pulling away from a person who's trying to show you physical intimacy, that's a sign that emotionally something is wrong. So be aware of all your signs and signals of physical intimacy. How do you choose to show affection with another individual physically? How do you choose to show that? Because we do it way more than our words. We do it way more than speaking. We do it by communicating with our bodies. Shaking a hand. That's a way to show. That's a way of communication. I'm agreeing with you, or I'm greeting you. Hey, how are you? So there's all these different ways that we show physical intimacy and we communicate physically that we're not necessarily conscious of. But the more conscious that we can become, the more consciously we're aware of them, then the better it'll help us out to understand what's going on within ourselves and how we want to form that relationship. So so just look at all the ways that you're physically intimate with another person. There's like massage is a good example. So like massage, hugging, kissing, guys, even sleeping next to a person, that's a form of physical intimacy. You're just sleeping next to them. You're not in communication with them mentally when you're sleeping next to a person, but you are in communication physically when you're next to them. Like if they're sleeping next to you and you have them wrapped in your arms, like that's showing that you care about them and you care about this person. And that is physical intimacy, at its core, giving them massages, hugging, kissing, just embracing them. Those are all forms of physical intimacy. So whenever you see signs of physical intimacy that are lessening, that's a sign to you that, hey, there's something wrong in the relationship. It's common sense, but it's not something that we always pick up right away. Awesome. So what's number 2? So number 2 is emotional intimacy. Emotional intimacy. Emotional intimacy. And emotional intimacy really helps us to understand how we're feeling emotionally. It's communicating from the heart aspect of us. So for instance, it can go from anything from how are you feeling? How is your day? You're asking about the emotions of a person. How are you feeling about this in your life? How are you feeling about this thing that's happening? We don't always know what's going on in our life at times because we're caught up in the process of it. And so it really helps to have a partner and someone in our life who's asking us how we're feeling about things. When we don't have that, we don't have that emotional support, so we can't even be aware of how we're feeling. I grew up in a home that really didn't have too much emotional intimacy. There wasn't a lot of emotional intelligence there. We've all heard of IQ, like intellectual, but the EQ is another thing, emotional intelligence, right? So we might have intelligence, like mental intelligence, IQ, but we also need EQ, which is emotional intelligence. So when it comes to emotional intimacy, one of the things that we want to recognize there is that having that in a relationship is incredibly important for us to understand the process of life, whatever it is that life is throwing at us. So for instance, let's say you're having trouble at work and you're having all these conflicting feelings, you're not sure how you're feeling about it, and you go home and your partner says, hey, how was your day? And you say, oh, I don't know. I was feeling this and I was feeling that. And then they ask questions. They say, well, how are you feeling about this? And you get deeper and deeper into it. And so emotional intimacy really just comes down to asking questions. Asking questions. That's key here. Asking questions. Boom. So asking questions, right? That's really what it comes down to. What's going on in your life? How are you feeling about this? What does that make you? What do you feel in your body? Where do you feel pain in your body? Where do you feel pleasure? What's going on your internal world? Guys, we have an internal world just like we have an external world, and the two are interdependent. And so if you don't have a good knowledge of your internal world, you're going to be feel very confused about what's going on in your life and the external, and that can be a really hard space to be in. So emotional intimacy really comes down to asking questions. If you want to build emotional intimacy with a person, you ask them personal questions. You ask them questions about their personal life. What's going on? How are you feeling? And you go deep and you dive deep with them. That's how you build emotional intimacy. So it's being caring, asking questions, showing care, establishing trust. It's really hearing them. A lot of times we're not really hearing people. We're always just listening to people, and we're listening for when we want to assert ourselves, when we want to share what we have to say. We're looking what we want out of the situation. That's not real hearing. Listening, true hearing and true listening is listening without any filters. And that's what it means to be in relationship, guys. When you talk with another person or you interact with another person, you want to hear what they're actually saying without having any of your own filters. So maybe they're trying to communicate to you that they need space and that they want space. But if all you're thinking about is wanting to be with that person and they're asking for space, then you're not even going to hear their requests, and they're not going to feel listened to because you weren't actually hearing them. But when you ask questions, it's important to ask questions, true, like caring questions, showing care and establishing trust, and really, really listening to that person. What is that person saying? And you can validate that for them as well. Let's say that person is communicating something and you're a little unclear about what they're saying. You can share that with them. Say, hey, I'm kind of misunderstanding what you're telling me. What's really going on for you? Because I want to really help you in this. Are you saying this? I repeat back to people all the time when they say something to me, whether it's a client or whether it's a person that I'm developing a relationship with. When they talk to me, they might say something and I hear it, and then I repeat back to them what they said to make sure that I'm actually hearing this the right way. And I said, is this what you mean by that? And then they say, well, yeah, that's exactly what I meant. I'd be like, cool, I just wanted to make sure so we were on the same page. That's what it means to be to have an emotional, intimate relationship. That's what it means to be in a relationship with another human being, to really, really listen for what it is that they're trying to tell you without any of your own filters and preconceptions, because then you can really hear them. And then when you hear what they're saying without any of those preconceptions and you validate what they're saying, then they feel heard and listened to. And that's what forms the relationship and what makes it strong. Beautiful. All right. Now, number 3, let's get into this. Spiritual intimacy. Spiritual intimacy. Spiritual intimacy is key. This is like doing spiritual things together. Going for a walk with your partner and embracing nature. Maybe you're doing plant ceremonies with your partner, or maybe it's going to church together. But whatever it is, you're sharing in the mystery of life together, and it's a spiritual process. And so it really just comes down to you being able to share the same thing with another person. And guys, the more I want to make it known that the more you're sharing of all of these, if you're sharing with another person, whether it's a friend, family, or a romantic partner, if you're doing all these things together, you're going to have a great relationship, because these are the components that make up a good relationship. When you have physical intimacy with a person, they're going to feel that, right? And so use this, guys. Use this in your relationships. Like maybe you don't have a good relationship with your father. Well, start being more physical in the sense where, every time you see him, place your hand on his shoulder. Hey, how are you? Give him a hug. Hey, even if the person doesn't feel comfortable with that, it might take some time, but that's how you build the relationship. You can create it. You are a creator. You're a creator of everything. So it's just knowing the keys. So these are all keys to build intimacy and to build better relationships. Let's say that you have an old friend where you guys went through a rough patch and you're no longer friends, but you still want to be friends with him, but for whatever reason, he's not reaching out to you. Well, send him a card or send him something that you think could help him get into his world, and show these things. Ask questions. What's going on within your world? Show care. Establish trust. Hey, you said that you wanted to meet at this time, at this date, so let's meet at this time and this date, and then you show up on time. That's establishing trust and building trust in the relationship. All these things here are key to building relationship, and you can create that. You can create this with anyone you want. It's a conscious process. A lot of us think relationships are unconscious, but that's just because we grew up with certain patterns. You can consciously build healthy relationships. So when it comes to spiritual intimacy, it's really just about sharing. Sharing in spiritual experience. So sharing in spiritual experience. So it can be going to church together, going for a hike, doing a plant ceremony together. It can be whatever it is that you want, but you're sharing in it's that time where you're not sure what's going on in life. It's indulging in the mystery, but it's doing it with another person. As humans, we naturally like to share. We like to do things with other people. So that's what spiritual intimacy really comes down to. Awesome. All right, number 4. This one's big. Intellectual intimacy. Intellectual intimacy. This was a really big one for me, guys. Intellectual intimacy. At one point, I was really, really living in the mind a lot, and I still love to read, but I realized that, there was at one point in my life, I had a better relationship with my books and YouTube than I did with people. And that's a really sad space to be in, actually. So I was in relationship with my books and knowledge than I was with people. And there's nothing wrong with intellectual intimacy, but there's nothing wrong with being, caught up in that space, but it's not going to be nearly as emotionally satisfying. Some people, they don't have a good connection with their family, so they escape to video games, or they escape into studying hard or working hard, but those are all forms of escapism. You can still have a really great relationship and have it being around intellectual things. So intellectual intimacy, all that means is you having a partner where you talk and share ideas. That's key here. It's just sharing ideas. Share ideas. So sharing business ideas, sharing creative ideas. Hey, this worked for me. Did this work for you? Talking about philosophy, talking about mathematics. It's mental. It's intellectual. And so if you feel like a person's not as intellectually developed as you, then that relationship may fall. In my last relationship, I was with a girl who I really deeply cared about, but I was really, really caught up in my mind. I love thinking about, the philosophy, deep questions, and that was what I was really focused on. And she couldn't really think or focus on that stuff too much because she was in nursing school at the time. She was focused on getting through school and passing, and she was more emotionally involved. I was more emotionally disconnected at that time to some extent. And so I think for her, we couldn't share that intellectual intimacy because I felt like I was at a very different level than she was. And so that definitely, we couldn't share that in our relationship, and that kind of pained me. And so it's important to realize, guys, that all these different types of intimacies you can bring into your relationships. Maybe a person is awkward with spiritual intimacy. You guys have different beliefs. Well, ask about their beliefs, get involved in their world, see what's going on in their world, and then find a common agreement between the two. Guys, that's the really key thing here. We're all human. You can form a relationship with anyone if you really, really want to. It's just a matter of meeting people in their world. Okay? So look at all these different forms of communication and different ways to be intimate, and see where you can apply these in your own relationships. Intellectual intimacy. Oh, I love to think about, Shakespeare, and I love studying 16th century romance literature. Well, maybe the person doesn't like 16th century romance literature, but maybe they love, like the computer scene, or maybe they love economics and talking about the latest businesses that are going to be successful or whatever. Well, you can share a common ground there. Listen to their world, see what intellectually stimulates them, and just hear about it. And you don't have to comment on it, but you can still hear about it. And if you listen to it, they'll feel that. Just because a person doesn't share the same interests in you doesn't mean you can't be in relationship to them. A lot of times we think that that's a barrier. It's not a barrier. Just listen to them. If they really, you might not like, business stuff, and you might like just art, but just listen to what they're sharing, and what they want to talk about for their sake, and just listen and be open to it. And you'll find that that'll increase the quality and the intimacy of your relationship, because you're putting aside your own preconceptions. That's what it means to be in a relationship at times, guys. So intellectual intimacy really just comes down to sharing ideas, sharing the things that mentally stimulate you, that you're like, ooh, that's exciting, I want to read more about that. So that's the intellectual intimacy. Spiritual intimacy is sharing in spiritual experience, going to church together, taking walks in nature, maybe going to the Grand Canyon and seeing the awness of it, or going to the mountains and feeling the awness of it. I can remember one experience with my last girlfriend where we went to California together, and we stood at the edges of the cliffs, and these cliffs were really tall, and the water was coming in, and it was crashing against the cliff, and it was shooting the water up. And we both just cried because it was so moving. It was a really deep spiritual experience that we shared together, because this water was so turbulent. It was just so beautiful, and so much was coming up. And there's emotional intimacy, right? Asking questions, really showing care to another person, caring about their inner world. What are you feeling right now? What's going on in your life? Can I help you in any way? Guys, it's when it comes to establishing emotional intimacy, one of the things that we always want to remember to do is to ask permission. Ask permission. Because emotions are really, really, that's primal. It's very sensitive. People are very, very private about their emotional worlds. You want to ask permission, right? And what does that mean? That just means asking permission, like, hey, would it feel more comfortable for you to talk about this? So let's say you can sense that your friend is out of whack and something is going on. Maybe they just had their dad die or something like that. Well, you wouldn't just want to go, hey, how are you feeling about your dad dying, or something like that. You want to ask permission, and that makes them feel safe. Hey, is it okay? Because the emotions are a really deeply sensitive area for a lot of us. So when people ask permission, we can feel safe to open up to that person. So always ask permission before you start just asking questions that are really deeply personal or intimate. That's really key here. So ask permission. And then finally, guys, physical intimacy. How do you communicate physical intimacy? Massage, hugging, kissing, rubbing, showing affection for another person. There's all different ways that we show physical intimacy with a person. So if you feel like your relationship is lacking that, well, then start showing it to the other person, and naturally they will want to show it back to you. That's a great thing about the law of reciprocation, and I'm going to get into that. The law of reciprocation says that we humans are wired to give back to others what other people give to us. It's like a law of the universe, right? The more you give, the more you get back. And so when it comes to physical intimacy, if you feel like your relationship is lacking physical intimacy, well, then start showing that to the other person. Start showing them love. Start showing them care. Rub their neck if you see like they're having a hard time, or give them a kiss on the cheek. Show that and start that. If you want to receive that, then give it, and they will start to naturally give it back to you. Awesome. Guys, do you have any questions about this? Is there any questions about what we talked about today, the different types of relationship and the different type of intimacies that we talked about? Michael, he says, it's actually spiritual awakening, and it gets beyond all this. It's remembering putting once members back together, leaving the third. Okay, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about, Michael. What else do we got? Hectus Raven says, I don't like to be touching others. Yeah, well, that's, you don't want to just randomly like touch people, but like you can do it in a way that makes them feel comfortable. So for instance, sometimes when I meet a person that I just met with, I just touch them on the side, right here on the shoulder. I stand off to their side. I gently place my hand on their shoulder and say, hey, how are you doing? And it shows that warmth. It doesn't show threat. It doesn't show too much affection, but it does show care. So there's different ways to communicate intimacy and affection. All right, guys, that's all I got for this time. Thanks so much for joining me. I hope this helps out. These are the different types of intimacies, the different types of relationships. Guys, if you got any questions, feel free to send me a message and reach out to me. Also, guys, please share this with any family or friends who you think it can help it out. I really want this information to get out there. It's really what changes the world. All right, guys, I wish you all the best. Thanks so much for joining. Bye now.